Why, hello. Today we're going to be talking about where are the robots? As I'm sure you're aware, in the mid to early 20th century, there were lots of wild predictions about what the world would look like in the 21st century. Chief among which are all of the robots that we would have, and all of the cool artificial intelligence and such. Here I found a website. I haven't gone to an effort to verify any of this, but I'm assuming this is all correct. But you can see the website up here. It's 10 predictions made about the 21st century from 50 years ago. And this is great. This is 2001, A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, talking about how by the year 2001 we're going to be a spacefaring civilization. Obviously I have When Wars Are Fought with Robot Soldiers. This is a prediction about the 21st century from the year 1930. And then you have just, some wild utopia kind of visions of the future, what the future would look like. The best one is down here by Robert Heinlein. I'm not a historian on 20th century predictions about the 21st century. So I'm making, to some degree, the assumption that people had a much higher expectation of what technological progress would look like. But it appears to me that that's a reasonable thing to believe, and that there, I presume, is plenty of evidence to support that claim. So the question is, why was everyone's predictions in the early 20th century, even back into the 19th century, why were the predictions thinking that we'll do this in terms of technological progression, and we did like this, right? And there's this huge gap in between the prediction and what actually happened. So you must ask yourself, what in the world's going on there? Why? I'm a big fan of Peter Thiel. He wrote a book called 0 to 1, and part of Peter Thiel's raison d'etre is to communicate to everybody. There's this that basically technology is not progressing like it should, and that's a very hard thing to convince people of. And that's what I love about Peter Thiel. But he almost refuses to answer the why question. He always, when someone says, okay, well, why has technology not progressed? And, he kind of shudders away from that question, because ultimately it's kind of a political, kind of a cultural, there's not one really great, easy answer as to why it's happening. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try my best to answer why technology hasn't progressed and why we don't have robots like Rosie from the Jetsons. Jetsons, Rosie. Why don't we have, well, that's a futuristic Rosie. Why don't we have Rosie? Okay, so to help explain why, I've created a little graph. Everybody loves graphs. So this is, if you look on the x-axis, we have economic and technological output. And on the y-axis, we have social and moral risk. So you can say, and this, again, is assuming that as your technological and economic output increases, the risk you take on increases as well. I don't know precisely what the relationship is. This is assuming, some sort of linear relationship. It may be, it may not be, but there's some relationship there, okay? An example is that we could build a car that goes 300 miles an hour, and we could allow that car to drive 300 miles an hour legally on the highway. And that would be fantastic, because people could get to work in like 5 minutes, where it used to take them like 30 or 40 minutes, right? That would be great. I didn't even actually double check the math there. But you would get to work a lot faster, a lot faster. So why don't we allow that to happen? Well, there's social and moral risk. People could die, and people would probably die if we allowed people to drive 300 miles an hour on the highway. So what we've imposed on this chart is an upper limit to our the social and moral risk we're willing to take on. So this is a cultural and or regulatory limit. Okay, it's some limit imposed by something, saying we are not allowing this much risk to be taken on. So driving 300 miles an hour, we can say that's over here. That would be, pretty good from an economic standpoint, but the risk is just too high. So we're imposing this upper limit through laws and regulations. What I think has happened through the mid to late 20th century and into the 21st century is that we have begun to lower this bar in terms of what we deem acceptable social and moral risk to take on. And we're seeing it not so much culturally and regulatorily, if that's even a word, as of late in the AI and robotics sectors, but we're seeing actually a cultural limit saying that you're not allowed to work on certain things because, well, let me talk about the types of risk that could happen, the types of risks that you go through as you lower this bar. Let me talk about that first. So up here we have death. That's our upper limit. And that would have been the upper limit for a long time in most of America's history. We have, as we've progressed, we've added more and more regulations, and the federal government has gotten bigger and bigger. And also, as we've all gotten richer, we've all said, what we've deemed acceptable risk to take on has lowered, right? So as we move this down, we're saying, okay, we've moved it down here. We're not going to allow any economic activity where the social and moral risk includes death, where death is some probable outcome or has an outcome of some probability and great personal injury, we could say. And you could look at that and you could go, well, that's fairly reasonable. We don't want people to get hurt seriously. We don't want people to lose limbs. We don't want people to die. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. All right. But as we've begun to keep moving this bar lower and lower in our society, we've begun to include things not just like death and great personal injury, but we've begun to include things like social justice. We've started to include things like inequality as the upper limit on our social and moral risk. And this is particularly influential in AI and robotics. What happens is all of the smart people working in these problems are all far left-wingers for the most part, right? And you kind of almost have to be, right? If you understand the relationship between personality, temperament, and political viewpoints, you'll actually see that people that are really interested in studying new things, learning new concepts, exploring ideas, these people all tend to lean left on the political spectrum. So all of the people that virtually can work on these problems are all far left. And what's happened in the left is that they have begun to fight very hard for social justice and economic inequality. And they've begun to believe that technology is the root cause of our social injustice, inequality, and a lot of the world's problems. So again, this bar has been dropping lower and lower and lower to where we're not going to allow any technology. And this is from a cultural standpoint, not a regulatory standpoint. But we're not going to allow any technology where the risk of the technology the social and moral risk includes greater inequality or social injustice. And there's so much of a narrative right now that robotics and AI is going to be the death of civilization, the death of capitalism. It's going to be the great purveyor of economic inequality, etc. So I think that's kind of what's going on. We could say that robotics and AI are some activities over here. If we would just leave the bar up here at great personal injury, we would allow ourselves to achieve this great economic output. But now that we've lowered that upper limit, all of the people that could be working on it aren't working on it, and aren't working on it as proficiently. Now, I don't think this is all doom and gloom, primarily because I've started my own company to usher in the future of robotics. I've started a company called Slate Robotics. And what we're trying to do in order to bring the future of robotics into the present era world is by building affordable development platforms such as this. This is the Slate Robotics TR1. We're still in the development phase, but development's coming along very well. So what I can say is it will be coming out this year. It should be coming out early to mid 2018. And the approach is to start off the robotics revolution much like the personal computing revolution started off, where you had the Altair 8800 and the Apple I. These were the first, you could say, personal computers that were affordable enough for engineers to purchase and play around with. And what happened was, once those engineers got excited about the product, they were able to go off and build the killer applications. And the reason I'm able to build this is partially because I see the need, and I have a great interest in robotics, and I have the talent and technical expertise to be able to build something like this. It's partially that, but it's also partially because I live in the Midwest. I live in Missouri, and here in Missouri, the cultural upper limit is up there with great personal injury and death. And it's not with social and political aims such as inequality and social justice, right? Here in Missouri, we don't concern ourselves with them types of things, which is not entirely true. There, obviously are left-leaning people here. But for the most part, that's not true. So that's an important thing to know. The problem with Silicon Valley and California right now is that they've lowered that limit so far to where they're pretty much only allowing themselves to work on things like iPhone apps and websites and your next food delivery service in online pet food stores. Because they've added in all of these aims, these social aims, that has lowered these limits to where they don't let themselves work on anything that would actually be productive. So I just want to finish with a little bit of evidence for what's going on in robotics right now. A little bit of evidence supporting the fact that there actually is a limit on that. This is a company or an organization called Responsible Robotics. Oh, God. That's good timing. I didn't know that was there. So Responsible Robotics, it takes a long time to figure out what they're even doing here. The mission for the Foundation for Responsible Robotics is to shape a future of responsible robotics design, development, use, regulation, and implementation. We see both the definition of responsible robotics and the means of achieving it as ongoing tasks that will evolve alongside the technology. So you're still sitting here kind of confused. Basically, without them actually saying it up here, well, I can say down here under law and policy, part of their kind of three pillars of what their responsible robotics organization is doing, they're wanting to enact regulations that where robotics are built with due regard to human rights and does not create or amplify social injustice. So this is an organization where their sole purpose is to lower this bar. And because there is such a relationship between these two, because there is a relationship between economic output and social and moral risk, when you lower the bar, you lower the economic and technological output, and technology growth slows. So that is an explanation of that. I hope this has been interesting. Links for my website and Twitter account and stuff like that will be down below, where you can stay up to date on Slate Robotics. This, again, it's going to be an affordable development platform. If you like robots, if you like programming on robots, it's going to be awesome. Should just be a few weeks away from having a lot more videos about this product. So thank you so much for watching. Toodaloo.